What's up, everyone? I'm Dimitar Stanimiroff, and I'm a London-based SaaS entrepreneur and operator. I've been in the talent acquisition space for the better part of a decade, but spent the last couple of years building machine learning forecasting software for sales. After a brief hiatus, I'm back in the talent acquisition space, having recently joined Handshake, the world's largest early talent network, as head of EMEA. In this podcast series, I catch up with some of my old industry friends and thought leaders to discuss the latest trends in the emerging talent space. I speak to some of our employer partners who provide tactical advice on how to best identify, attract, and engage early talent. And lastly, I chat to some of my colleagues here at Handshake, giving you a behind-the-scene peek into how the world's fastest-growing edtech company is being built. Well, thank you for making the time, and I'm glad we managed to resolve the technical issues. that was an interesting start. Now, I know you don't need an introduction really, but I thought we should just start with a quick introduction, just for those who might have not met you or come across you in the last, 15 years that you've been active.
10 years,
yeah, on the scene. So over to you. Why don't you just give us a quick intro before we get started?
Yeah, so thanks Tim, I'm Bill Boorman. My background is I'm a recovery recruiter, so I spent a long career in recruiting, and for the last 10 years I had a training business, and for the last 10 years I've been doing a mix really of working with technology companies, particularly startups, on things like product, market position, and so on. And we've worked together numerous times on different projects. I do a lot of research into the market and produce papers and content, and speak at probably most of the leading HR tech conferences globally. I'll speak on all three continents each year in normal times when we're traveling. And I also run an event called True, which is a network of unconferences. There's about 100 go on around the world. And I work with hiring companies on technology and methodology. So people like PwC, KPMG, Oracle, on different areas, really all kinds of different areas of talent acquisition and HR.
Yeah. So you mentioned that
with VCs and PE funds on where they invest their money. So it's lots of pieces of work that fit together.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you and I have worked a number of times on various projects. And one of the reasons why I was keen to have you on today and was because, I think it was like 5-6 years ago, you did a research paper for us back when I was a Stack Overflow that kind of had a very interesting angle to it. At the beginning, I think, of the paper, you explored the history of job discovery, mainly how that has changed over the course of history, and how people went about finding and discovering job opportunities way back in the day, taking us to where we are today. So I thought we'll start there. And obviously, the company that I'm with right now, Handshake, its focus is on early talent. So I thought we should start with kind of having to talk about this change that we have seen of how we go about finding jobs and what that has meant for the early talent markets. I
think you've got both sides to that discussion, really. When you look at it, you have to look at both sides, which is not just how do people find jobs, but how do jobs find people.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds a little bit semantic, but how the ways in which companies connect with people, get the right people applying, and the way in which people connect with the right jobs and the right employers. That's kind of and actually, if you think about that research paper, it hasn't changed at all in centuries. The location that it happens has, and the way in which it does. But fundamentally, it was still about the same thing. It was about people who had jobs meeting people who wanted jobs somewhere. I think if you remember at the start of the paper, we talked about that being the medieval hiring fairs in England, where stately homes would go along and they'd kind of do some kind of assessment. I'm sure there was plenty of bias in those days, but some kind of assessment of looking people up and down and saying, I think you'd make a good butler, I think you'd make a good housekeeper, or whatever it was. And then you had to turn up with your papers, which validated that you were a fit and proper person. You could do that. When you think about it, that's not any different. That's not any different to what we do now. In fact, I think we've been through a whole cycle where we're going back to that kind of small community connecting over time. I think we're actually going back to the medieval times in the method that we work. The place that we do it and the tools we have to do it, that's what changes.
Yeah.
We're doing it by video or by phone, or we're running communities or whatever we do. Those are the things that change. The actual method hasn't.
Do you want to quickly go? Do you want to quickly go through? Because obviously, before we jump into where we are today, I mean, last time we spoke, you mentioned how back, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, when you were starting your recruitment career, the venue, as you said, had changed, and people would come to you. It was like the days of the high street agency, where you would be in your office in the high street.
It was primarily the main differences. If you want to talk about what the internet changed, if we want to get into that, the numbers of people were very low, and connections were quite small, because acquiring talent or getting your job to the attention of people was quite an expensive process. Primarily, it was advertising in a newspaper, referrals always featured pretty strong. We might have called it the old boy network, but it was somebody introduced you to work.
Yep.
And it was who you knew, whereas I think nowadays it's really who knows you, which is kind of a reversal of that, but it was who you knew. So but the numbers were quite small. Obviously, everything was done on paper. People came and filled forms in. We put them in a filing cabinet and stored them away and ignored them for however long we called them, and never looked at them again. But if I wanted data from you, you had to give it in a physical form. It was either you had to write me a letter, a CV, whatever it was. Obviously, the internet changed all of that. And the thing that it changed in particular was volume. It was much easier for people to connect. Therefore, it was much easier for people to apply. Therefore, more and more people applied. And then we got job boards as central places. Job boards were created from message forums. So when I talked about the medieval fair, as soon as people started gathering to talk about specialist topics like programming or whatever it was in the very early days of the internet, people started thinking, actually, we could post jobs there because the people are there. They're having the conversation, we can post the jobs. And that's really, and that evolved into job boards, and then we needed technology to deal with the volume. So we got things like the very first ATSs, which was actually built by Monster, interestingly enough. But we started to get the first ATSs for doing that kind of thing. And that's really how recruiting has evolved. And then we get more and more of, when we've got connections, we want to market to people, we start introducing tools like CRMs and so on. And everything has really been about something that I think we haven't quite cracked yet. So we went through a good period of time where it was about getting volume. We had to talk about the war for talent, that it was very difficult to get people, but of course there was no less or no more talent available. The talent pool is what it is. We one or two changes. So where we got to with that was it became about being able to manage the volume, and that's really everything that's been built in the last 10, 15 years has been geared towards reducing volume rather than increasing volume. So originally, when everything was set up, it was really about just put your jobs out there, what we call post and pray.
Yep.
And post and pray, and then it became post and spray, and now we're going through a phase that we call it post and play. But essentially, it all starts with a job. You put the job out there and you see what happens. Where we're getting to now is trying to reduce the volume and increase the quality of the right people.
Yeah.
And the way in which that's done. So that's kind of a shorthand version of where we've been. essentially.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
that's back to what we said at the beginning. When I started out in recruitment 36 years ago, I was working in an agency. I never had more than 4 candidates because we had to advertise in a newspaper. I might have been lucky and been able to do that once a week, or as people who walked into my office to fill in the form. So the volumes were quite low. We try to get back to that where we have manageable volumes with high quality.
Yeah.
And that's really what everything that we've been working on in technology and methodology in the last probably 5 years.
So is it fair to say, and I know this has been the case in the broader talent acquisition industry, that we have seen, as you say, over the last 10 years, let's say, a significant shift from the spray and pray approach, meaning that you post a job and try to advertise on as many channels as possible.
Only to some degree, because I mean, you live in the early careers world, and if we look at something like the milk round, that's really
Well, so I was going to get to that.
Go to all the universities, see as many people as you can, and hope that some of them are all right.
Well, you beat me to it. So I was just going. What I was getting at is that the broader talent industry has started experiencing the significant shift, going away from this idea of volume and trying to get to see as many people as possible in the hope that the right candidates would walk into your office or would reply to a job posting, whatever it is. And we are moving faster and faster towards a more direct sourcing approach where you would proactively try to source the right people. And to your point, and this is interesting and a good segue to go into, the early talent market seems to have stayed back where we were, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, which was all about volume and trying to see if we can get lucky. Can you talk to me about this for a little bit? Why is that? Last time we connected.
Well, there's a number of things. One is, and I'm speaking about the companies that I've worked with, I'm aware there is some variation, but because early careers has been largely tied around degrees, right? It's graduates.
Yeah.
You're automatically tied into a graduate calendar. Or what months do people qualify? What months are people taking exams? What months are they going? And then if you get into things like professional services, I did some work with one of the 2 or 3 of the professional services companies in the last 5-6 years. You then get tied into other academic calendars, like, for instance, if it was an accountant's, the date of the ACCA exams, which was the first early career. So those schedules generally meant you went on a calendar of people graduated in September. You did the milk round on certain dates, and you were probably looking at trying to get to the attention of year 2 students so that when they were year 3, they would qualify. And, you'd remember that from your own university days. Weren't that long ago, really, compared to me. So you'd get your milk round, stuff. But then you'd also get the date in which you take your exams, when you get your qualification, whether you qualify to take there's a calendar set out that says we follow that calendar, and it doesn't particularly change, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't particularly change.
Yeah. And so last time we spoke, you said something interesting, which still kind of rings in my head, that so when it comes to technology recruitment, I think you said is the recruitment is last to adopt new technology, and within recruitment, graduate recruitment is definitely the last. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think one is because the cycle is there. So the model's there. This is what you do.
Yeah.
It's been very difficult to shift out of that. The other thing is so it's very difficult to shift about, right, if we look at the UK, let's say in the UK, I know the US is pretty similar. There's 3 terms in the academic year. And 3 holidays, and there's exam dates, right?
Yep.
So you're trying to wedge in your recruitment activity into that calendar for a start. When is the exam date? When do people qualify? When, what's going on there? So I think you try and you fit into that, and as a result, business practices have fitted in around that. And graduate recruiting is also usually hived away from it's seen as being something completely different to experienced hires.
Mm-hmm.
So it's usually a different tech. It's very often different technology. It's quite often a different ATS in a lot of the organisations that I go to. You know, so it's and if you go to a recruiting conference, you'll see a lot less people than if you go to one of the graduate recruiting conferences. Say you get around the UK, and I'm just using those as an example of it's seen as a different entity, having different dynamics, working in a completely different way. So as a result, you have a completely different setup, which is tied in around the academic calendar. Which isn't really fit for purpose these days.
Yeah, can you go into more detail as to why that is not?
The biggest thing that's smashed out, I think, is all companies have become digital companies, right? So, I've spoken and done stuff with everyone from kind of speaking to somebody like a JP Morgan to speaking to someone like a KPMG, PwC, Accenture, whatever it is, and all of those companies have essentially merged into the same company. They've all become digital companies. So they've had specific talent or specific disciplines that they hire for, and then they hire for digital talent. And let's say 50, 60% of the hiring they're doing is for digital talent. So what you've got is a lot of companies vying for the same digital talent or knowledge workers. They might be called something slightly different from one organization to another. And the requirement of digital work, let's look at professional consultancy, the requirement of digital work in that environment doesn't have a calendar. So projects can come in at any time. Therefore, it's much more agile, being ready to hire all the time rather than following a very fixed calendar of you do the milk round on these dates, you start interviewing. People get their qualification, you start interviewing in September, they start in January. You can't follow that calendar anymore. It's much more agile.
So,
and I don't think necessarily organizations have moved on to that yet. Also, the other concept, which I think is quite important in this, I did some work with Bank of Ireland on this. We're looking at candidates for life. So if somebody graduates, they're probably going to go and get jobs somewhere else. That's most of the people you're connected with will work for somebody else in the next role, but perhaps in the same discipline, certainly the similar discipline to where their academic career is, similar kind of role, similar kind of organization. They're going to move around and you're going to want to hire them at different times. They're not only interesting for that short period of time. So, and if we think of the entry point as being, it was interesting actually. When I worked with Bank of Ireland, we took a very similar thinking. We came to the same conclusion that between what they were looking for a customer life cycle, which is when you get your first student account or when you get your first child account, maybe even with your pocket money, you would open with the bank and the bank would adapt what it offered to you throughout your life. Major events being like when you wanted a mortgage, when you wanted a loan, when you went to university, they would have products to offer you and relationships to build with you throughout your lifetime. We started looking at that from a recruiting candidate point of view, saying a candidate's for life, just some of the time you're looking for a job and some of the time we're looking for hire. So how can we make sure those two events overlap, but maintain a relationship with you forever? That is not separated when you join us to when you leave us.
Right. Well, let me take you back to what you said earlier about that and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but this is kind of what I took away from it, that graduate recruitment is no longer or should no longer be a point in time event. It should not be tied to the milk round because of the changes that the recruiting companies have undergone in the last, call it 10, 15 years. Yet it is still tied to the milk round and going on campus and trying to meet that.
That's always a different argument. So the milk round is when we get into a branding argument sometimes. Like nobody wants to stop it. Because nobody wants to be the one who doesn't. Everyone has a fear.
Yeah.
or PwC, KPMG, Accenture, whoever, you have a fear that if we don't go and physically do that,
you are signaling to the market.
There'll be some kind of suspicion that we're
totally
not
get it. 100%. But then this year,
equally it's very equally it's very easy to carry on doing what you've always done.
Yeah. And so I understand.
Yeah,
I do understand the point that you make about not showing up to the milk round. It signals right away that you might be in some sort of financial trouble. People might take it as we're not hiring, etc. So I get this. But this year, no one can actually do the milk rounds. Obviously, because of COVID, universities, in fact, most universities are actually not even teaching on campus, let alone hosting graduate recruitment events. So I wanted to, I thought you might talk to us a little bit about what the implications are.
There's two things. There's two things there which are quite important. One is you can't turn up for the physical milk round.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean people aren't trying to have milk rounds.
Yeah.
What we've seen in all organisations is what we've tried to do is we've been forced to not physically be present, or we've been forced to be online, work from home, rather than planning to do that. It's been a thing where, right, okay, we've never had a medically induced recession before. We've been forced to work from home, but actually we've worked from home by trying to do the same things we would have done just online. So instead of going to the milk round, we've had we've turned around and had a medical. We've turned around and had a digital online. We've all gone to Zoom meeting rooms or whatever it is. Some of that's worked, some of that hasn't, clearly. But equally, it is an opportunity to examine all of our practices and say, why do we do the things we do? And what we're going to find is large parts of what we do because we've always done them, not because they're fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And I think the milk round is one of those things. I think there's two areas that are really challenged there. One is we were already beginning to look at, is it necessarily just university graduates we're looking to hire in early careers?
Yep.
And that creates new complications because at least when you're talking about graduates, they're in a captive place. They belong to a university. They belong to an alumni, right? So the audience is very well defined. You've got very defined topic areas of study that say, right, I want to study students who've done this. If you're doing entry level from the general population, that creates some challenges about where are they, what are they doing, what are they up to at the moment. So that means changing different types of communities. They're also permanently looking because they're not tied into this academic calendar. So it means rethinking when you hire and how you hire. That equally doesn't mean it shouldn't be an either or between graduate entry level careers and early careers. It shouldn't be, right, let's not hire anyone from university. It should be, let's hire the best talent. So I think we're being forced to rethink lots of things, and we should take this opportunity to do that. And what, earlier I talked to someone last week who came up with a phrase that I thought was really interesting. So we were talking about historically having done spray and pray. He said, in this market, what we're doing is spraying and playing. So what that means is we're trying lots of new things.
Right.
On a small scale, when we're not even necessarily hiring. We're trying lots of things to see what connects with people, where do we get response, what things which would be reasonably simplistic in marketing, not necessarily in recruiting, but A/B testing and what messages are working and what topics are people connecting with and so on. But they're doing a lot. There's a lot more of that happening. So I think what comes out of that from the smart companies is going to be really interesting. The biggest thing which we're looking at is when the balloon's lifted, the coronavirus is over, we don't have to wear masks and all that kind of thing if that ever happens. But when that comes in, what will we just go back to?
What is your prediction?
So I think
So obviously,
these are really important things in recruiting. So one is most hiring, those organisations that are hiring and booming, and there is about 50% of the market that's booming and 50% of the market that's died.
yeah,
And it's really distinctive, reasonably obvious by sectors. And loads of people have talked about that, so I won't bore you with that stuff. But I think what we're finding in that is companies have had to go digital because you haven't been able to interview face to face. This is a really important trend, I think. What that's meant is hiring managers have accepted interviews that previously they would have had face to face, doing it over video, right? And you were trying to push video 10 years ago when we first met, right?
Yeah,
and the market
more than 10 now.
Yeah, but the market wasn't quite ready for that stuff, right? So, and only now is hiring processes almost entirely digital. The 4 or 5 interviews, the assessment, the test, the attraction, everything is almost entirely digital. And what the result of that is, we haven't moved on yet from needing a face-to-face interview to make an offer. And we may never do that. It may not be the right thing. Who knows? So what that means is we're now in a process where the hiring cycle, time to making an offer, is 1 interview.
Yeah.
And it's shrunk significantly by at least 50% in terms of time to get there, because people are available. And I think that will stick in a lot of organisations. I think we'll just see 1 hire.
Yeah.
Practical things like advertising, jobs are only being advertised for 1 week, whereas previously they might have been advertised for 6 to 8 weeks in order to get the volume. So hiring and decision making shrunk significantly, and I think that will stick.
Do you think this would also translate? Do you think this would also translate to the early talent market?
Completely. There's no reason why. If you look at anything we do, even if we completely transferred our existing process, and I would hope we wouldn't do that, but history says that's kind of what we do. We just do what we used to do, just on a different device or in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Back to the medieval hiring fairs, as I said right at the beginning. So I don't think those things will. I think what in early careers equally will stay digital, because there's a lot of reasons for saying actually we can do a lot of these things better digitally. We just weren't. We needed a virus. We needed to have to do it in order to do it.
Yeah. And so when you say a lot of it could be done better, I kind of presume you mean things like you can do it cheaper. You can basically, the cost per hire could be brought down. The process could be, as you say, shrunk by up to 50%. Is there anything else significant that I'm overlooking here?
No, it's quicker.
Yeah.
You can involve more stakeholders.
Yeah.
You can have much better candidate experience and process, and actually candidates much prefer digital.
Yeah.
But if you give people in the early stage of job seeking, I do some work with Job Palette company to do chatbots. And one of the things that really stands out to me is when we give people the option of talking to a bot or talking to a person right at the beginning of process. So once they've sorted out foundation, 95% of people choose to talk to a bot.
Wow.
Choose to, elect to. And actually, the more senior they are and the older they are, the more likely they are to choose the bot, which was the opposite of kind of.
That's crazy.
But absolute fact. I've got 100%.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I would have thought it's the other way around.
I think people don't want to mess around.
Okay.
I think
so you think.
What I think is happening, which is really clear, is it's jobs over employer brands. People are choosing jobs on the basis of jobs, not on the basis of careers.
Interesting.
This is quite difficult for early careers, right? They're not. So what I believe fundamentally is people are more focused on careers than they ever have been. They're just not focused on careers with a company.
Right.
So I'm not anticipating that when I start this job, I'm going to be here in 10 years or 20 years. I'm not excited by you wheeling out your old partners and saying, look, if you come and work here 20 years, this is where you could end up.
Where does the employer brand come into play here? Then say, I've got an option of.
It's not employer brand anymore. It's
I know,
not
I hear you, but let me just ask you this. If I have a choice of 5 different companies that offer me the exact same career opportunity, well, not career, as I said, job opportunity, if you're saying it's about the job, I don't see this as a long.
Which they kind of do.
So how would I choose then? If it's not about, so they assuming they're all 5 are identical, what would be?
Job brand. It's job brand. It's which
So
of these jobs and
Yeah.
which of the people, like for instance, this manager or this team,
Okay.
or this,
So you're
or
saying
this brand name, but you're looking at it through the lens of a job. So what I'm actually looking, I'll look at a job on the basis of, if I do this job, what's my next job going to be in a different company?
Right.
What's going to make me more employable? What's going to make me more attractive? Where am I going to go and learn a skill which I think is going to be needed in the market, or who's got some interesting work? So, and that's looked at very much through the lens of this job and the here and now, rather than the long term.
And you mentioned something interesting about, you kind of mentioned it in passing, but I think it's a very important point about who the manager is and who your teammates are, right? So something that I'll throw in here from back from my Stack Overflow days is we did lots of research on this, and one of the most important factors that came into play when deciding whether you wanted to join a particular company was one of the top 3 things, was who your teammates are going to be. So it's not just the job, but who you're going to.
It's what you're going to get. It's what you're going to get from them, right?
I guess that's one way of putting it, right? Yeah. So yeah, I guess, in the context of software engineering, it was, and you can very easily quantify this, is how good of a programmer, or how good were my teammates, and as you put it, what would that mean for my career development? What would I learn? Would I be challenged, etc.? And I think, to your point, this translate. It's not just for like experience size, but anyone, especially if I'm starting my career right now, that would be kind of front of mind, right? I'm basically hungry and eager to learn. Who is it there that is going to take me on that journey and teach me? So I guess what I'm hearing here is, it's less about the glossy brand, but more about, as you say, the job, and being able to connect to someone who you would be working with early in the process. Kind of makes a big difference on whether you take the opportunity.
Long before you apply, that's the most important thing. You actually want to talk to recruiters later.
Yeah.
You actually want to talk to recruiters about process. How do I get employed? What's it going to be? What's the easiest way? And facts, what's the salary? What's the benefits?
But you want to build a relationship with someone who is actually doing the job.
Doing the job. It's peer-to-peer. So it's how do you, increasingly what we've seen is we've been looking at opportunities to facilitate peer-to-peer connections.
Yeah.
And we saw this really early days with LinkedIn, where if someone was interested in applying for a job, the first thing they would do, and you see that you can track this digital behavior, they go and look at the LinkedIn profiles or Stack Overflow, or depending on the market, really, where the profiles were. But they go to LinkedIn and they look at the profile of a peer.
Yep. Yeah.
And what they're looking for is, do these people look like me? The most important thing is, I know the application process is going to be really painful, so is it worth applying?
Right. So it's not even, so it's interesting you say this now, because that is somewhat different to the first statement, which is what can I get out of it from a professional standpoint, but also now I think you're kind of touching upon something slightly different, but equally important, which is, would I fit in and would I relate to the team that is there? When you say, do they look like me? Do they speak like me? Whatever it might be. That's kind of an interesting
although you have
one.
to be very careful with that you don't end up, this has caused a lot of our homogenous organisations where everyone looks the
same.
True.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
And that's caused us lots of issues with diversity. Culture fear, the desperate desire for culture fear has had most negative impact on diversity.
Yeah. Well, I meant it the other way around, where if you're trying to consciously improve your diversity and inclusion profile as a company, to your point, it's very difficult to attract.
There's absolutely no point trying to improve your diversity.
Okay.
No point. It's a false measure.
Right.
What you've got to improve is your inclusion.
Right. Okay.
If you improve your inclusion, diversity follows.
How do you do that then in practice? How do you do that in practice?
That's a whole different webinar, but Well, I think it's just constantly looking at how inclusive you are and what gets in the way of people. From entry, what stops people from getting hired?
Mm-hmm.
Really? What are the real things? This is where data is so important. What are the real reasons people are getting rejected? Hiring managers always used to say, not a culture fit.
Yeah.
Don't fit in is given in about 90% of reasons for not hiring someone. It's either something really solid, like, oh, they haven't got the skill in this or the skill in that, and you can look at how relevant that skill is, or it's they don't fit in.
Mm.
They didn't feel right out of gut feel. Once we start collecting data on that, that's where we start to see trends of, hey, it's really strange. All the people who don't fit in are all women, or whatever, or it might be a class thing, didn't go to that university, or don't have a plum accent, or
yeah.
wrong colour skin or whatever. So we can start to collect that data where we can say, right, okay, this is where the problem is. The problem then isn't, although sometimes it is supply chain, that you're not getting enough people into the application, and because you're not getting enough of a diverse audience into the application, ultimately, just purely on ratios, you're not hiring the right diversity. So there's tons of work that I think we need to do in terms of attraction, which is much more to do with audience and reach than it is content, actually. Putting the right content out, because I've seen some terrible diversity initiatives. It's kind of like that episode of The Office where they're going, we're trying to look like a diverse organisation. They're always looking for the guy in the wheelchair so they can push him to the front of the pictures, right? You're one employee in a wheelchair, saying who's got a physical disability. So I think but if you work on inclusion and sharing the inclusion message and showing that people genuinely, the only thing that prevents them or enhances them in an organisation is their ability and their performance, and no other factor. And that's right from hiring. That's our major challenge at the moment, is how do we create inclusive working environments? And if we get inclusive work environments, then diversity will be natural.
Yeah. So it's more.
We won't need targets.
Yeah, it's an output rather than an input.
Yeah, I mean, it's very real. I spoke at a lot of D&I. I've been speaking about D&I probably for about 6-7 years, and before it was a thing, really. And I spoke at a couple of quite big D&I conferences this year, one in the US, one in the UK. And my biggest concern from all of them, I was glad we were having the events, but everyone who turned up to the event was a D&I officer. Whose job it was D&I. So I felt like I was preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I'm like, you people already get it. Actually, you're not the challenge. The fact that somebody has that job title means someone's thinking about it.
Yeah.
The challenge is the recruiters, the hiring managers. That's where the challenge is.
Yeah.
How do we reach them? And we've got a long, long way to go with that.
Yeah.
But if we can put the data in, we can make the attraction right, if we can connect with the right numbers, if we get the very first bit right, which is supply chain, we get enough diversity into the supply chain, into the entry level.
Well,
then we can start identifying where we have issues.
Yeah, well, this actually brings us nicely full circle to where we started with the, early careers and the fact that forever they have been tied to physical locations. See, if I'm a graduate employer, and the only means for me to build my pipeline is to physically go to X number of locations. I only have 24 hours in a day, and as you say, this is constrained to a short period of time. I choose to go to certain universities, and if year after year I'm returning to the same university, the inclusion kind of piece falls on the side.
As a graduate recruiter, you choose the universities that your hiring managers will accept.
Yeah.
Well, regardless of what your opinion is, you might think, we need to spread the net, and we need to go to some. I mean, in the UK, people still call universities polytechnics by what they remember, and there hasn't been a polytechnic, 15 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? But they still say, that university's a poly. Because it was when I graduated, therefore that's what it is. Right? So that whole conversation of where's the talent and is it obvious? And I think the whole concept of universities is under challenge at the minute in terms of
Yeah.
how fit graduates are coming out. You're getting more organisations who are looking at skill-based assessments.
Yeah.
And saying, you know, whether someone has a degree or not, it's skill-based. We're seeing that's challenging the universities. But equally, I think we're challenging the universities as in, do we get a better candidate from Edinburgh than we do from Aston or Birmingham or East Midlands University or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
And lots of things we're challenging in that, like, you know, somebody's academic grades may not be the same, but if they've had quite a hard upbringing, they've had to actually really, you know, two of my friends' brothers who are twins, hat tip to the twins, they're their first kids from their school to go to Cambridge. So I think we're starting to look at things like that and saying, academically, there might be other factors other than exam results which help us to understand that one person is going to be better talent than another.
Yeah.
Again, that's another whole show, but I think we're challenging those perceptions now.
Yeah.
As to how do we actually get to the right people?
Yeah. Let's.
And I think the other change is, as much as candidates are looking for the right job for now, companies are looking for the right people for now. So I think as soon as we take retention out as being a measure, retention is only really a measure of how poor we are at firing people who shouldn't be working for us, right?
Right.
We need to stop thinking about retention. Think of everything in terms of jobs, job by job fitting together, understanding that people will move and they'll come back and all that kind of thing, and try and hire people for the job and for the now in the same way as companies are hiring for the now. And what then that will become, it will become.
Right. Excellent. Well, that was a nice way to wrap it up. We about 4 minutes over time now, but really thank you for your time. Very insightful as always.
It's my pleasure. Always a pleasure, my friend.
And hopefully we'll do it again soon. I think there's quite a few topics that you touched upon that I think we can definitely do a whole different show on.
We could do a book or something like that. We should write a book. I'll speak to you later.
All right. Cheers, Bill.